Ladies and gentlemen, welcome to the October webinar series on how to protect your China business. I'm finding that there's a lot of blockage in people's mindset about going into China. And there's a lot of fear about operating companies in China from abroad, particularly nowadays, as we cannot actually step foot into the Chinese market with the border controls that are in place due to the pandemic. And my feeling is always, well, if you've got a headquarter, you have in some shape or form instilled corporate governance guidelines for your employees to know how to work on a day-to-day basis and what rules and regulations they have to follow, what company policies do they have to follow in order to work in this environment. Why are we not creating these same government policies, this corporate governance, in our own China entities? And I tell you why. It's because when you first enter the Chinese market, you might not have any staff on the ground. So what is there to control? Number two is you will hire slowly. You won't hire from day one a team of 10 people. But even if you hire one person, that is the trigger for you to know that corporate governance needs to be instilled in the company. And the feedback I always get at that point is, well, I don't want to pay for it. Well, if you don't want to pay for it, then don't have the shock or the audacity to realize at the end of the day when people are cheating you or things aren't operating the way you would like them to operate. So today we are going to be looking at fraud. We're going to be looking how employees can instigate fraud and what recommended actions there should be to protect your China business. Before we start today's webinar, though, I always like to know who's in my audience. It'd be wonderful if you could share your background and whether you are a newbie, whether you are a startup, or whether you are an experienced China hand. How the webinar works is that I'm here to teach. I'm here to educate you on what you need to think about in order to protect your business in China. All right. This is going to be time spent. Use it wisely. Please do go ahead and submit your questions and comments into the question section of this control box. We are using Zoom meetings. So as a reference, if you run into any internet issues, there's nothing I can do except advise you to log off, log back in, and hopefully that will work. We are recording today's session, so the recording will be available to everybody, all the registrants as well as the attendees at the end of today. And remember, ask away if there are things that are not clear. Who am I? My name is Christina Kohler-Colucci. I'm the head of business advisory at Woodburn Accountants and Advisors. I've been 17 years focused on inbound investment to China, which basically means that 100% of my clients are foreign investors that are looking to expand into the Hong Kong and Chinese market. And I've helped over 500 companies with their apologies. I'm constantly adding people into the room, so bear with me. So I've helped over 500 companies with their market entry, as well as their implementation. And honestly, the fun part of the job right now is helping these companies to scale up and grow in the Chinese market. I'm a creator of a number of different methodologies in China surrounding protection of your business and creating a sound foundation. So everything from the China roadmap to the incorporation blueprint, which all helps companies to create solid foundations where they have the ability to grow and scale up at the speed that they can. If you guys haven't received it, we have written a small ebook on the 10 biggest mistakes companies have made in China. This is my opinion in terms of what the 10 biggest mistakes are. If you would like a copy of this ebook, email me at christina@woodburnglobal.com and a copy will be sent out to you. So to start off today, day one, we're looking at how to avoid fraud and manage human resources in foreign companies in China. And obviously we'll be taking the perspective of what to do with the fact that you cannot physically travel to China due to the border. I mean, you can travel to China. I don't want to say you can't. You can travel to China. You just have to go through the various quarantine measures and get the necessary documents to travel. But let's say it is a blockage and people aren't doing it. So what can you do to prevent fraud? Create corporate governance within your organizations to protect your business. So we're going to be looking at factors that contribute to fraud and corporate governance, proven strategies that will help you to avoid fraud, and how to develop a corporate governance in your China organization. So why should we be concerned by fraud? Because like in any other jurisdiction around the world, China is not the only one. Fraud does exist. But as I highlighted in my introduction, the market entry into China is always staggered, where you might start off your operations with nobody on the ground. So what corporate governance do you need to instill? Although you should have corporate governance with your various suppliers and third parties that you collaborate with. Then you'll probably start off with one person. And the feedback, as I said earlier, is with just one person, I can manage, I control, I can do what I need to do, even from abroad. I don't need to instill anything in formal writing with corporate governance. If you think about your headquarters and how you are operating, you obviously have corporate governance instilled in there in the shape of employee handbooks, management directives, company policies, whatever else that you might have that employees have to sign off as they are being onboarded. If your excuse is that you don't have the capital to invest in instilling corporate governance within your organization by implementing these operational guidelines, employee handbooks, then do not be surprised if fraud and situations like this arise on your doorstep because you did not preempt it, all right? And just like any other jurisdiction, if you don't protect your business, people will abuse you and take advantage of those situations. So like in any other jurisdiction around the world, China's not the only place, fraud does exist. And it will surprise you when it comes because it will happen when you least expect it in your scaling up phase, where you won't have the time to focus on that. We all have high expectations in China because it is the market for opportunity, it is the market for growth today. So we've got high expectations. We want things to move quickly and fast. But if you don't take the time to instill these administrative measures, you will not scale up. I'm living proof of that. It took me 10 years to scale up because I didn't have the right foundation in place. And I was always taking 5 steps back, dealing with administrative measures versus focusing on the scaling up that is required when going into China. And obviously, because you are not physically on the ground, even prior to COVID, you won't permanently be on the ground unless you decide to relocate there, then you need to instill trust into your team, into your ecosystem that you are developing. You have to. Otherwise, what's the point of going into China? You can't do it alone. You need this ecosystem to help you. But make sure as you're developing this ecosystem that there are guidelines in place, management directives in place, company policies in place, contracts in place with suppliers and customers to make sure you are protected. Most importantly, when you go through your China journey, and I'm living proof of this, and so are the majority of my clients, fraud will happen in some shape or form at some point with somebody who tries to take advantage of you, just like it may have happened in your own home jurisdiction, in your own headquarters, or in any other subsidiary that you might have opened around the world. So if you can preempt it, you are saving yourself a lot of hassle, headache, sleepless nights, and you will have the ability to focus on the business and scale up. So to protect yourself, and this is part of my China roadmap signature system that I've created, where I have provided step-by-step guidelines on when you should be protecting your business, when you should be instilling these operational guidelines. If you haven't looked at that book, let me know. I can give you the link to it. The most important though is that you have certain things you have to protect. Now, I've made a very short list here, okay? And I can add more that will come on the top of my head. But one is intellectual property. Have you protected that? Have you created licensing agreements? Just general corporate governance. How should people be acting and operating within your organization? Due diligence procedures with third parties. Do you have an operational guideline on how you should be vetting your partners or how you should be vetting your potential employees? Company chops. Do you have an operational guideline on how the company chops should be managed? Because many of them need to be kept on the ground in China for operational and efficiency use. So what have you done for that? Have you instilled a logbook so you know where the chops are being used? Or have you decided to keep the chops with yourself, which isn't as efficient, but it certainly will protect your business? Have you created system processes for trade transactions? And by that, I mean, have you put in operational guidelines on discounts? What do you tell your sales employees about providing discounts? What are their thresholds and limits? What procedures have to go to get approvals to provide discounts? Can they do it on their own, but is there a threshold of how low they can go? Do you have to approve every single sales contract? Who does that? Who signs off on those? Who negotiates them? The same goes for service transactions, right? Discounts, better price offers, contracts. How is that all being organized within your organization? How does the system work for invoicing and FIEs? You need to create these operational guidelines, these SOPs within your organization so that your employees know exactly what they should be doing and are following it. In what inventory and warehousing systems, are you getting weekly or monthly inventory checks done? Do you know exactly what is in and out of the warehouse? Bank accounts, who's operating the bank accounts? What management directives have you set on the ground for the use of those bank accounts? Who are the bank signatories? And the list can go on, okay? Because on the bank accounts, you might have limits in terms of the amount of transfers, etc. So it's about going into different areas of business and knowing how you should be controlling all of these aspects. Luck is not a strategy. And I say this because I arrived in China in 2003 and I didn't instill any SOPs, nothing. But mind you, neither did my friends who were working in other organizations. Back in the day, China was the wild, wild west. Nobody created SOPs because nobody knew how to create operational guidelines and system management, create management systems and processes. It really was the wild, wild west. We were taking it day by day. And we were like, we hear the stories. It's never going to happen to us. It did happen to all of us. And again, it took a long time for us to create SOPs because there was not this history in China, except with the multinationals. But if you were an SME going in, there was not really this mentorship or this guidance from lawyers or other service providers to say, we got to now create SOPs, we've got to create corporate governance systems. It existed in the multinationals, but it just did not exist within the SME frameworks. We are now in 2021. We don't need to go into China with luck. We need to go into China with a strategy and with SOPs by our side to protect the business. Let us all learn from the mistakes of the old timers that really lived by luck and lived day to day on hoping that nothing would happen to them and no roadblock would occur, an obstacle would occur. Okay, let's learn from these past timers and make sure we create our structures. Now imagine your life. Now I've put this based on my own experience, but imagine what your life would look like if you had a China subsidiary and that everything was in compliance. And you knew that because you had SOPs in place for every division. You had a check system knowing that the GM had to go through a check system to make sure the SOPs were being implemented and used. You knew that every month or every quarter period, there was a health check that was being organized to make sure that the company was in compliance and in good standing. Imagine what your life would be like knowing day in and day out what was happening in your China business, sitting in your head office. This has been everybody's dream during the pandemic because nobody's been able to fly over, right? We want to know what's happening day in and day out. Otherwise, what's the point of having that subsidiary? We want to know what our bank balance looks like. We want to know what sales are occurring. But we need to create these SOPs in place so we get that information. Imagine what your life would be like when you recognize warning signs, when you see the red flags. And you've got somebody beside you, or you've got several people, several mentors beside you who have the solutions on hand to fix it immediately. Because you've developed that ecosystem of people who support the business, help you find these warning signs and red flags, and find a solution. Okay, that would have been my dream 17 years ago. And I was on the ground. I was there in the office every day. Well, I had none of that. And most of my friends who lived in China and were working for small, medium-sized companies didn't have that either, because that was just not the time when we were doing these type of things. Today is different. Today is a new era in China where we can implement compliance procedures, corporate governance, and SOPs into our organizations, where you can sleep better at night knowing that you've got a Chinese subsidiary you can't travel to, you're stuck on Zoom all day with them, but at least you've got SOPs in place where you're getting the data and information that you need to know that everything is okay. Now, obviously, the question is that data correct? And how can we verify that that data is correct that you're receiving? Okay. So what are the four biggest problems that lead to fraud in China? There are a lot more, but then I could speak a whole day on this. And that's why I also highlighted my book, which is the 10 biggest mistakes companies make in China. But I'm focusing on the main 4 ones that happen during the startup phase, okay, of creating that foundation in China. So one is the lack of control and communication. The other is turning a blind eye, just being like, yeah, it's China. I just don't want to know. Okay, just get the results. I just don't know how you get them, which leads obviously to ethical situations, and then obviously inexperienced staff. And we're going to go into these 4 in detail. And I apologize for all the writing on here. Again, I'm going to leave it open. I'm not going to provide the slides to people, but I'll leave it open a little bit. But the goal on the actual live is just to listen to me, and you can always go back and read the slides later on. Lack of control and communication. Okay, so prior to COVID, what did people do? Especially for SMEs, they said, okay, well, we're abroad, we're going to develop a team locally, and we'll travel once or twice a year, or we'll have different people from different divisions. So maybe we'll have 4 to 5 trips a year to China, and then we'll check it out, right? The issue is this: you've got language barriers, you've got time zone barriers. Emails are not a China thing anymore. WeChat is, right? So you're probably not getting the communication like you would in your own head office when you're going on a business trip and everything runs as usual. In China, you've got language, you've got time zone, and you're using WeChat. Okay, it's not the same system as you have back home, and you need to be able to adapt to this new system. But you also need to create SOPs, because the worst is spending time on phone calls where the communication is just not clear because there's so much misunderstanding about what the requirement is from both sides. If you put a very simple SOP on paper, and trust me, guys, SOPs are not complicated piece of documents. It's not rocket science to create an SOP, all right? You have something on paper. It's done in a step-by-step format. It's very clear to see what the rules and regulations are within the company, what information has to be passed on. You can avoid all of the misunderstandings, all of the constant communication and WeChat messages. Of course, if you get the data and you've got questions, then you need to have a follow-up call, but you have something concrete to look at and to then discuss and communicate why numbers aren't matching, why the information is like this, whatever else it might be. Okay. But the lack of control and communication is purely because you don't have SOPs that are running in your organization. And the staff are clueless about what to do, about what your needs are, and how they should be providing you that transparency. You need to dictate that to them. So the recommended action here, if you really have a lack of control and communication, is the following, okay? Look at where you have that. And in a majority of situations, it's going to be around administrative functions, such as the accounting, the tax, and the payroll. Could also be around sales figures, and how the sales is operating. So you need to think about how to solve this. 1, you create SOPs. And I'm going to say this throughout today's presentation. You need to create SOPs. 2, in your startup phase, do not underestimate spending a little bit more money on professional advisors or independent administrative managers who can have a new set or a fresh set of eyes on your business. Okay, either you outsource it all to organizations that have the communication capability, that have an SOP within their organization to send you data and information, or you develop that internally yourself. But having always a new set of fresh eyes looking into the business will guarantee that you are creating a solid foundation, because if you do this frequently enough, these people will see the red flags, the warning signs, but will also, even if everything is smooth, provide you insight on how to still improve. Everybody's company can improve. There are always ways for improvement. But having, again, fresh set of eyes looking into that, again, it's all about creating that sound foundation so that you can scale up at the speed that you want to scale up. Does this mean you'll be spending more money? Yes, you'll be spending more money on protecting your business. But what will it solve? It will solve the fact that you've got control through outside parties. It will solve the fact that you are outsourcing to providers that have language capabilities that are needed, but also they should have SOPs within their own organization that they would outline to you about how they collaborate with you and the information, what type of information they would be passing on. And then again, it's about a matter of where else are you lacking control and communication? In what other divisions? Would it be in sales? So if in sales, you don't have clarity, you need to create an SOP. You need to tell your team, what information do you need on a weekly basis, right? You need to know who's signing contracts. You need to know who's negotiating contracts. You need to know price lists. Are there price lists? Have you provided those price lists? Are the price lists in your ERP system so that they're easily accessible to the team? Okay, it's not a matter of going into China, which is exactly what I did, going to China and winging it and seeing day to day what to do, because your focus is then on solving things versus actually scaling up. Okay, we don't want to wing it. We want to go to China with a solid foundation that's going to help us grow. And does that mean then investing a little bit more? Yes, it does. Turning a blind eye is something that, again, I am guilty of, but also it's very, very common. Why is it common? Because ultimately we're looking to go to the Chinese market and we want stability, right? We're making an investment and we want to create stability for the first few years. However, you can't have that expectation, because ultimately, yeah, you're going to hire a team of people that you will have turnover, and you will be rocking the boat as you fire people and let them go, because you need to explore what is the right fit for your organization. Now, the example that I've put here is this. You can create a business model in China where you say, I'm going to hire local people and they're going to do it for me, which means we're going to do everything in-house. We're going to set up the company in-house. I'm going to hire these people and I'm going to trust them. They might be old business partners of mine that I've known for 25 years, and I'm going to trust that they do everything for my organization. Okay, that's one way of doing it. The other way of doing it is outsourcing it to local providers who say, I'll do it for you. I'll just do it for you. You don't have to pay attention to anything. I'll just do it for you. Or you can take the third route, which is the recommended route, which is I'm going to work and develop an ecosystem where everybody that I work with is going to build this business with me. They've got an incentive to build this business with me. It's not about doing it yourself. It's not about having companies do it for you. It's about working with partners who are going to build the business with you, that have the same vision and guidance that you need. An example that I put here, which is still very common, is you've got a lot of companies who decide to establish an entity with a local manager that they've known maybe for 15, 20 years. And after 3 to 4 years, they realize the company was never properly established. There's a lot of mistakes that have to be updated because it was all rush, rush, go, 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 and just do it. right? So there was no, the key decisions weren't even thought about, okay? There's no corporate governance because you're like, yeah, I hired the local manager. I mean, he's in charge, right? And then you're wondering after 3 to 4 years, why is there no profitability? Why is spending more money? Why is China asking for more money? And you've got no clarity about what's happening day to day in the business. Zero. And in many instances, you don't even know how to read the P&Ls and balance sheets. This is actually doing it in-house and you not paying a single piece of attention onto your business. Okay. And it's turning a blind eye. It's saying, I've got to go to China. There's opportunity for me in China, but actually, I don't want to be in charge of this. I'm just going to hire a local guy who I've known and he's going to do it for me. Or I'm going to go the cheap way. I'm going to find providers and I don't want to spend a lot of money. They'll just do it for me. Why wouldn't you want to take the route of having third parties or employees who want to do this with you, who want to scale this business to a volume and a value that's incredible, right? And it's all in the name of rush, rush, rush. But you just turn a blind eye. So here is our recommended action. Every case of fraud or deliberate non-compliance or incompetence is usually known by somebody else within the organization. Okay. And usually it's somebody who's trying to build this business with you because you've inspired them, because you've motivated them. And as a result, if you are in your startup period and you've got a small operation, you want to have contact with each of these staff. I always have this belief as a Westerner, I'm not the expert in China. I know a lot and I've experienced a lot, but I will never be the expert. My staff will, my local staff will. They're Chinese. They've lived there their whole life. They've studied there their whole life. They will know better than me. But if you don't instill the mindset of my staff should be growing this business with me and they should be actively advising me on possible, they should be acting as your whistleblowers, advising you on potential incompetence for, you should be developing relationships with all of your first hires because they are the ones who are going to help grow this business with you. Okay. And don't be afraid of that. Involve them in that. That's the first way of actually building up relationships. Okay. Now, as a second piece of advice is from day one, instill health checks. Okay. Instill health checks because the idea of the health checks is not something that's negative. It should not be perceived as something as negative. It should be perceived as bringing in external providers who can help us make the foundation more efficient and make sure we're not making mistakes because we're all human and not all of us will know the ins and outs and the exact ways of doing things. That if you can bring in external providers to give guidance, especially during your startup phase, who wouldn't want to take that? Again, you're trying to find people who will help grow your business with you. Okay, the concept is with you. All right. And again, you've got to mention, you got a team in China. You've got yourself in your headquarters, wherever that might be, US, UK, you've got time zone issues, right? If you don't instill management directives and operational guidelines for your team on the ground, how do they know what to do for you? I mean, if you only say what your KPI is to make sure you achieve 1 million RMB in sales, fantastic. How? What are your guidelines? What are your procedures? What's your company protocol? Right? You need to give them this direction because ultimately it is your company. And if you need advice on them how to develop these SOPs, ask them to prepare an SOP as their first job function. Their first job function can be preparing an SOP for a sales conversation. What will be the step-by-step flow? And then you work off of that. Again, they're the experts. They should use their expertise from previous job experiences to implement these operational guidelines for you. And that should be their first task. Price listing, product listing, all done by them. They have to do this preparation work. That's what your first hires should actually be doing. And that's obviously looking at the operational guidelines and looking at the management directives, but ultimately you also have to make sure that you are protected from the employee perspective, right? If your employees are terrible, you need to have the ability to fire them and not have the fear of rocking the boat, which was what I had when I started off. I didn't want to rock the boat. My staff were client facing. I didn't want to rock the boat with my clients. And as a consequence, for 5 years, I had inept employees on staff. I was like, I'll just deal with it on a day-to-day basis. But again, my time was spent fixing things and not on scaling up. So you got to make sure your employment contracts are bulletproof, that they're according to PRC laws. You should have employee guidelines, which are employee handbook, for example, with your operational guidelines. And you should have in this employee handbook a very large section on breach of contract. What do you consider as breaches of contract? Is it how they communicate with clients? Is it how they communicate internally? Is it, I don't know, whatever it might be, leading all the way up to if they've done criminal activity. Okay, and then you have to start issuing warning letters. And don't forget to add in your contracts confidentiality clauses, non-competition clauses, again, to protect yourself, particularly for those that might be holding higher senior level positions. All right. Then we come into ethical situations. And again, I'm guilty of this. Okay. China used to be China, right? You can do anything in China. There's always a solution, regardless if it's ethical or not. Okay. Times have changed. We are now living in 2021. We need to abide by the rules. And we want to create, obviously, an organization that follows the rules. Okay. How would you feel in your own home jurisdiction, in your own headquarters, working for a company that didn't abide by the regulations and the laws? You would quit. You are finding that local staff are doing the same. So I'll give you an example here of a very unethical situation, which is, and it still happens today, and it's probably why the labor regulations are getting stricter and stricter. Foreign investors are cheating the system when it comes to social insurances. Simple as that. They are finding the ways in order not to pay or to pay the lowest amounts, hoping that they won't get caught and hoping that the staff will just accept it. And social insurance costs in cities like Shanghai are very high. There's no doubt about that. Okay. But social insurances include everything from pension to medical insurance, to a variety of different things that protect your employees. You have been hired in your own home jurisdiction. I bet you wouldn't accept the job if you didn't get the proper social insurances or MPF funds or whatever it might be that you get as part of your social insurance packages, right? But for some reason, companies in China are still following this belief that they can cheat the system in some shape or form. So I can tell you times have changed and employees are not accepting this anymore. They won't accept the roles and they won't accept the positions. You've got to do things above board now. And if you are caught, accept the high penalties. Make sure you've created your budgets that are solid, listing all the social insurances that have to be owed. And then be fair, because there are a lot of things that are not included in the basic social insurances. I, for example, have added that all of my employees can receive an annual health check. That's not part of the standard social insurance package. I also pay a little bit more per month, about 30 renminbi more per month per employee in case of serious illnesses like cancer or heart disease or whatever else. Again, 30 renminbi, guys. I'm talking about $3-5 US a month per employee extra. So again, understand what you have the ability to pay, or what is the basics, but also understand what is optional. And then also think about external insurances like external medical insurances, travel insurances, life insurances, if you like, which is not so common, but exists. You know, if you've got the budget available to you and you want to make your staff happy, these are the things that will make them happy. Employees want to receive things that are locally available to them. Don't put them on your insurance plans that are abroad. What use is that for them? None whatsoever. Will the cost be higher? It will, but it's just a matter of then calculating your budgets. Okay. Now, this also, ethical situations also comes into play when you're talking about business transactions, kickbacks, under table dealings, discussions with tax officers where you're doing a side negotiation, right? Bribery. So if you're from the UK, US, you've got very stringent regulations there. You've got the Bribery Acts. And even if, you know, that Bribery Act pertains to all the subsidiaries that your headquarter would own globally. That Bribery Act already should instill that you need corporate governance within your own organization. Now, the other side of the coin is, in many instances, you can't get away by doing something that's outside of the book. For example, for Chinese New Year, I always give to the female tax officers cake coupons at Chinese New Year. I'm not giving them cash. We buy at a bakery a cake coupon for like 50 RMB, 80 RMB, so it's under the 100 RMB threshold, and we give that as a gift. To the male tax officers, again, it's usually a coupon to purchase an app or to whatever. But it's a coupon of something. It's a voucher for something. It could also be a voucher for a meal, right? It's something that under, usually for me, I always go under the 100 RMB threshold. Because again, 100 RMB is peanuts in the grand scheme of things, and I'm doing it as a gesture of kindness to my third-party providers. I also do it to our bank office. We've got a really good relationship with him, and I appreciate all the effort he does for us in terms of speeding things up with transactions and whatnot. It's just about formulating relationships, just like how you would go for a business dinner. I don't go for business dinners with my bank officer, but I give coupons, right? So it's trying to figure out ways of showing kindness and gesture at peak periods in the year, like Chinese New Year, and how to do that. Now, in places like the US, they might consider that as an act of bribery. I'm not trying to bribe anyone. I'm actually honestly trying to thank them for their work with my own company, right? So you need to have, again, a guideline that also shows to your employees what they can and cannot do in terms of gifts. If you've got a client and you want to thank them for their business, what are you allowed to do and what are you not allowed to do? Right? Is a business dinner enough? Or can you go to the extreme of saying, I will get them a bottle of whiskey that costs 3,000 RMB? Right? You've got to make sure you've got these things also within your operational guidelines. And make sure you've got systems in place to check whether your staff are getting any forms of kickback from suppliers, from whomever, right? And ways of doing that, again, is by bringing external parties, not in a negative way. You should never perceive it as being something that's negative. It's something, you know, these external providers are coming in to check that the company is efficient, that it's in good standing, that you have the ability now to go into the next phase of scaling up. Okay. Now, recommended actions is, again, just understanding in your own home jurisdiction, looking at your own bribery acts, how do they impact your subsidiaries, and understanding what the Bribery Act is in China, and understanding, again, that you're not doing anything that is outside of your business scope, that you're conducting business according to PRC regulations. Okay. And again, using your team not as, I don't want to say it again in a negative way where they should become the whistleblowers in case somebody else is doing it, but that you have developed a good relationship with them, that they want to go grow the business with you. And if they have that mindset that they're going to grow the business with you, they will be more inclined to kick out the bad eggs who aren't helping to grow the business, right? The next is inexperienced staff. And this is probably, again, the biggest issue when you are starting up your organization, because you might not really know what is the right fit for your company. So in the past, it used to be, well, we need to have a foreigner on the ground. Nobody wants to go. So whoever just said yes, might be a new graduate, I'll send him over. The guy has got no experience. You're sending him across the world to China, new culture, new language, everything. Doesn't even really know your business. And you're hoping that this person will kick it off. Alternatively, you hire people on the ground, and because you're so fixated on a fixed budget, you don't hire, again, the right people for your organization. And then you've got this fear of rocking the boat and letting people go. So you're building up, you're hiring your first employees that are inexperienced, not the right fit. Some of them might even be expensive, because now, places like Shanghai, it is expensive. And they're not doing anything, and you're sitting and waiting for results. You need to have trigger points in your mind, or let me put it another way. You need to create KPIs for these employees that are strict. And within the first year, you need to be doing reviews. Month to month might be a bit harsh, but I would say at least quarter to quarter, to say, look, you're not achieving the results we need to be achieved. What's going on? You've got to put pressure on them, because again, you can't travel there, right? Not yet. And who knows when it might be. We're hoping second half of next year, but who knows right now. So you need to instill KPIs, 1 or 2 or 3 different KPIs that they have to achieve quarter to quarter. And then you have to have a trigger and say, okay, look, you're not achieving them, it's time to go. And warn them quarter to quarter. Send a warning letter or an email saying, based on our review, these are, you've got to word this a bit differently, these are the bad points and these are the good points. You've got to warn the bad points. And if you don't, repercussions are potentially letting go. Are you putting a lot of pressure on them? Yes, you are, but I'm sure that you have a lot of pressure to make sure you achieve results in China. So if pressure is being put on you, put the pressure on your team. And if they have the mentality of growing this business with you, then they should be achieving the results. And if they're not achieving the results, listen to them. Make sure you are understanding why they are not achieving the results. If they are not giving you the right answers to that, or they just, they can't tell you why, it means they're completely inexperienced and invaluable and basically a waste of space. I'm being a bit harsh, but again, the first hires are the most critical. And I just want to say also, as you're scaling up, as you are adding to your team, everybody is a valuable component to your organization. Everybody. Everybody should be adding something of value that you have the ability to scale up. So if you're also building up a hierarchy, you need to sometimes even teach your managers how to create these 8 KPIs for their team members, that it's a quick hire fire situation if they're not good. Because they might also have the ability to say, oh no, we'll wait. Waiting gives you nothing. So again, create these KPIs. And something that I just say as a benefit, employees love to train. So if, for example, your feeling is, there's a certain amount of people that don't know how to write emails, provide them a training on how to write emails, how to write business emails, whether it's in Chinese or English. If you feel that you have a certain number of staff who don't know how to give presentations properly, offer trainings on that. There are trainings being offered by all chambers of commerce in China, by other training types of companies that offer this useful, skill sets that need to be learned to do business in China. And people love that. They love to be trained. They love to learn more. So if you have the ability to offer that, in many instances, if you become a member of chamber, there'll be certain units that you can get for free of charge as well. So I recommend that tremendously. Recommended action. For your key roles, make sure you are hiring experienced experts in their field, in your sector, in your industry. I made the experience back in the day, again, because of budget reasons, to hire. My mindset was this: I'm going to hire lower individuals, so junior accountants, with the hope that they will grow with me and become senior managers. And that's where I had difficulties, because many of them didn't have the same mindset as me. Many of them didn't want to grow. They were happy where they were. Many of them didn't have the ambition to scale up. Many of them didn't have the skill set or wanted to learn that skill set to scale up. Okay. Those first hires who will eventually be your department leads should be the experts. They should have already, 10, 15 years of experience in your industry and sector. They should have contacts that can introduce the company. They should be bringing value in. Okay. That should be your main aim. And does that mean that initially your budget will be higher? Yes, it will. But don't underestimate that, because it also might mean that with experience and that maturity, you might not have to hire other people within that department so quickly. All right. And be very careful when you hire GMs, divisional heads, department managers. Make sure you do background checks on them. Talk to previous employers, check their resumes. People can fake resumes nowadays. People can fake LinkedIn profiles, whatever it might be. And do not forget also, for higher positions, don't forget to check on LinkedIn. China currently is still accessible in, LinkedIn is still accessible in China, although 2 weekends ago, there was an article in the SCMP that, which is the South China Morning Post, that LinkedIn was actually exiting the Chinese market. So take it for what it's worth, try to use it, create a back profile of resumes so that you've got, people and contacts that you may want to reach out in the future. Do that prep work now. So for me, preemption by action is your best and least expensive form of protection. What do I mean by that? The more proactive you are in getting your foundation set up with SOPs in place, will be critical for your scaling up in the future. And you can create these internal operational guidelines and management directives. Again, my tip would be the first people you hire, ask them to create it, because they should take the experience from their previous jobs to implement that. Start doing health checks and internal audits every so often. The goal is obviously not to do the health checks and internal audits forever, right? At some point, you may be able to do that in-house, but it's to get the ball rolling, that you're bringing in external parties. Usually when I say health checks and internal audits, because I'm in the accounting profession, I'm talking about it from a finance perspective. There are companies out there who can also look at it from a sales perspective, from a procurement perspective, from a marketing perspective, to go in and check what is being done in these different divisions. Think very carefully about the appointment of directors and senior management personnel, and then obviously obtain advice and build your ecosystem of China experts, your third parties. So health checks and internal audits, extremely useful tools to implement. The goal of these health checks and internal audits is ultimately to make sure the company is in good standing, i.e. you're doing everything that you're supposed to do to remain in compliance, and 2, that you are getting recommendations for improvement. Okay, and 3, and hopefully it doesn't happen, watching out for red flags, which can be anything from very large transactions that are occurring that you weren't aware about, to So a lot of that is also doing internal interviews with the employees to see whether anything should be mentioned during those interviews. It is advisable to do internal checks. In the startup phase, my recommendation would be to do it every quarter period. Eventually, you could do it biannually, all the time after the profits tax filings have been completed, because the profits tax filings should be part of the internal investigation, internal audit investigation and health check. The appointment of senior management and directors, a lot of this involves how you're in your corporate management structure, how you're deciding on communication between the people in the corporate management structure and the China team. And again, the information that you need to know to make sure the company is running smoothly. Okay, you need to know what you need. I, for example, want to know my bank balance every Friday. I want to know what sales were achieved every week. And then on a monthly basis, I also have a series of reports. So every boss should have their criteria in terms of what information they need from the different divisions. You also should know how much you can digest. I can't digest large amounts of information. I just need numbers to poke out at me. So make it also easy for your team to be able to deliver that to you. If you start asking every day for a pile of documents that are 20 pages long, your staff are gonna be like, we need just one person to do this for you on a daily basis. Right? So be reasonable about what you need as a boss, as a project leader for China, to be able to know that the company is doing all right. But there's a lot of things that you can do in terms of the appointment of the directors and senior management people. So for example, you could have signed and chopped and undated termination related documents, so you know how to kick people out. This can be kept with lawyers, because sometimes it's very difficult to terminate people from the corporate management structure. You can provide for people in the appointment director liability insurance, individual liability insurance, and provide a broad indemnity for those that are involved in the day-to-day business. Don't underestimate these insurances, especially if you're signing local contracts. Shareholders should be defining the limits of the authorities of everybody. This should be in your articles of association. If it's not, then it should be kept separate. What are the limits of authorities of everybody in the corporate management structure? Who do they have to report to? It's a chain of communication from your team in China to the senior managers, to the corporate managers, which are in the corporate management structure, to the shareholders. Right? And how is this flow going? What information needs to be passed along this chain? Again, it's an SOP, right? And you need to just know how that flow should actually occur. Somebody should be monitoring the actions and the decisions being made by senior managers and directors, because what you want to make sure is that whatever decisions that are being made are in the best interest of the company in China, but are also according to PRC regulations and are ethical. Another thing is, and again, for those that might already be established in China, is doing a review of your articles of association. So if you haven't established a company in China, one of the documents that will be created is your articles of association. There's a standard format that comes from the computer system once you're doing your online application. And it can be amended and more detail can be added inside it. Your articles of association are your company bylaws, which should indicate the limits and thresholds and powers of authority by everybody that's in the corporate management, but also the senior management, which includes the finance director and other department heads. Okay, make sure you're reading these in detail. Make sure you're putting these powers of authority and these limits within them. If you haven't done so, you can do reviews on this. There's no stopping you from going back to it, reading it through and saying what would we like to change. And most importantly, make sure your articles of association are matching the employment contracts that are set for the employees. Because if the powers of authority are only written in the articles of association and not in the employment contract, you're only halfway there to being able to take anybody to court. Okay, they need to be listed or ideally they should be listed in the two documents, most important one being in the employment contract. Additionally, here I've listed the company, the CHOP control mechanism, but I also want to highlight bank accounts and bank tokens. You know, you need to really look at what is valuable to the company, not only in terms of the normal brand assets, but also in terms of the physical, tangible things you're going to receive once you've incorporated your company. So one is the CHOPs. One are the actual certificates and licenses, the originals, and other is then the bank tokens and the access to the bank accounts. You need to understand with these three things, how are they going to be controlled? Who is going to have access to them? Where are they going to be kept? And will you have logbooks that are utilized? And again, logbooks are a pain in the butt. Nobody wants to fill in a logbook each time something has to be used. But again, if you want transparency and clarity, a logbook for the usage of the licenses, a logbook for the usage of the CHOPs, a logbook for how the bank tokens are being utilized or the financial is being utilized in terms of the bank is important, right? And then obviously knowing who possesses and keeps all of these things. So also you need to have backups, right? So for example, if things are kept at your in-house and it's only one person who's got access to all of that, if that person is in an accident or goes on holiday, who's the backup? Will it be your accountant, your law firm? Will it be a second person within your company? Who is the backup individual? The same with the bank signatories, right? You have the legal rep CHOP, the financial CHOP as the bank signatories, but then you usually always should have a third or a fourth. So for example, I'm a bank signatory, but if something happens to me, so is my brother. Okay, do you have these backups in place? Because what we don't want is that we can't scale up. There are these blockages in the system. And I've highlighted the three things which are used frequently in China: licenses, CHOPs, and bank account. Right? If you don't have the ability to have these three things accessible to you, you can't sign contracts. To bid projects, you need a copy of your business license. Sometimes you need the original. If you don't have access to the bank account, how can you make payments? Receiving payments is usually never an issue, but how do you make payments? Right? So these three things really need to be, again, SOPs put in place to know how they should be utilized. And then obtain advice. So you're on here to get advice, right? And the idea is that whenever something pops up, or you feel like you haven't instilled the proper SOPs within your organization, you need to talk to a lawyer or your accountant or your external providers, whoever they might be, to get advice on how to fix those situations. Or if you feel that, you know, you've hit a roadblock or or an individual within your organization made a mistake, versus, you know, hitting them on the hand saying you've got a warning now, fix it, create an SOP. Mistakes were usually made because there was no guidance being offered to the team in the majority of cases. Others, you'll find that people just make human error. But realize that, you know, for example, let's talk about document storage. You've got thousands, you should, because China is very much all about paperwork. Thousands of documents will be stored in your office. How are you storing those documents? Will you have digital files of those documents? Where are you maintaining those documents? Who's in charge of organizing everything from invoices to contracts to SOPs to payment orders, sales orders? Where is that all being kept? Because trust me, in China, you need originals. It all needs to be printed out and it has to be filed. Who's doing that filing for you, and is it organized? Right? Digital data. Well, now let's talk about the most common things, which is personal data protection. How are you protecting the data of your employees? How is this being maintained? I'm not an IT expert. This is not something I can advise on, but this is a hot topic at the moment where companies are having to look at their SOP system around employee files and employee data and how it is being utilized. And do they have to fix things within their operations to protect the data of the employees? It's very hard to do because we're all using WeChat. And companies have no authority over personal people's WeChat accounts. So you do need to get advice on how to create an SOP for you if deals are being negotiated on an employee's WeChat account. So again, there are IT providers who are doing a lot around cybersecurity, data protection, and now employee protection. You will have the accountants who can go through data storage, ERP system, CHOP usage, bank token usage, and all of that type of stuff. You will have lawyers who will have systems in place that can help you in terms of contracts, contract maintenance, doing contract reviews, doing contract renewals, all of those things. You should be looking, and then obviously you have the HR side of that, which is employment contracts, employee handbooks, company policies that pop up, and making sure all of that is maintained as well. But get the advice on how to create these SOPs and these guidelines. Now, again, I relate this to trademarks. People never want to go through the process of registering their assets in China because it's an administrative process. They know they have to do it, but because documents have to be filled in and sent out, nobody does it. Creating SOPs, I tell you, it's not fun. I hate it. I also don't create it. I read them. I ask everybody else to create it because I don't enjoy it. It's not a fun part of the job. But I have seen how it has changed the company, and it has also changed the mindset of the employees to feel like, first of all, I'm giving them the ability to amend SOPs, but also when we onboard new staff, we've got the whole training book of SOPs that we use a guideline for onboarding. And it has made the onboarding process of new employees that much easier and that much quicker. And then we get advice from the teams to come in and share, should we change things? Can we improve the efficiency? And we do that every so often as well. But it empowers the team to feel like they can help change the company for better to be able to then grow and scale up. Okay. So make sure you are getting that advice. In my China roadmap, under Superpower 5 and 6, I've put protection and system processes, because for me, it is so critical. So it's analyzing what needs to be protected in the business, and then actually developing and implementing system processes over what has to be protected. If you guys haven't seen the webinar on the China roadmap, it's up on our homepage. You can just download it, and you can review then all the aspects around that. But all the 9 superpowers here, people generally don't do, they don't follow, they don't then create a solid foundation, and they're kind of winging it when they go into the Chinese market. And again, we don't want to wing it. We want to make sure we know what we're doing and we're covering ourselves when we're going in. So that's the end of today's presentation. I would love to hear what your biggest takeaway was. If you could write that up in the chat, that would be excellent. It always helps me to then know how to change the topic in the future if something is missing. If you feel like something was missing, also mention that. There are 8 ways you can work with Woodburn, with the incorporation, competitive business benchmarking, and then ultimately we can also help you to create corporate governance SOPs and things like that as well. If you want to book a session with me, I'm just going to exit this and then I will share my details in the chat right now. And then we can ask a question or two. So I know, Stephen, you arrived late and you said, can you please clarify SOP, standard operating procedure? So you can call them operational guidelines, you call them management directives, or you can call them just standard operating procedures. And You know, as a tip, you can also go to Google and type in SOPs, and you'll find a lot of drafts and templates. Hold on, let me unmute you, Stephen. There we go.
Yes, hello, Christina. Thank you for
Hi.
the thank you for the extra explanation on the SOP. It's a typical abbreviation many people can use, but for me it was not yet known. I was aware it was about the kind of a rule or a procedure. You need to make procedures. I fully follow your advice here. No, thank you.
If you've got any questions, any more questions, let me know. If it was all very clear, then just to let you know, tomorrow we are looking at the individual and corporate risks and precautions for foreign investors. By individual and corporate risks, I am referring to the rules that are in the corporate management structure, because again, people seem to need clarity on what risks they would take on to hold the roles as legal rep, as a GM, as a supervisor. And then on Wednesday, I'm talking about audit and tax compliance requirements in China, because we should be starting those procedures now for next year. So if you need details on what that all is, you can subscribe at woodburnglobal.com/events. So I'll be doing this topic on an annual basis, because again, October really should be the month where we start doing risk reviews. We should be looking at corporate governance once again for the new year. We should be looking at the audits that are coming up, the year-end audits. We should be looking at the total annual compliance procedures we need to do. And I always bundle this as well into the whole risk side of things and corporate governance side. And do we have the right SOPs, and involving the team to give their insight on what can be improved, what should be updated. And all of that helps, because if you are adding headcount in 2022, now is the time to make sure you've got your training manuals and onboarding processes all set up to make sure that's all in there. So that's the end of today's presentation. And if you've got any other questions, I'll stay on for a couple of minutes. Otherwise, I wish you all a fantastic day and hope to see you tomorrow. Take care and goodbye.